So why don't we go through some of this using the kube control command, and that really is just a command that makes these API calls using GET requests. So let's look at what all we can do with Kubernetes. Okay, so now let's demo how you use Kubernetes command line. We've seen the graphical tools, but I think actually showing you the command line and the fact that all of this is available via an API, you can start to understand how to control your data center using software. So the first thing I'd just like to do is to actually look at how we would deploy a set of pods and how we would go about doing that. So I've got a YAML file here, and the YAML file simply describes a deployment. So you can see we're using the version 1 of the API here. We're going to make a deployment, so we just say the kind is a deployment. We're going to give it a name, Nginx deployment. I'm going to use the app Nginx. I want 3 continuous replicas. This means if one dies, it just starts another one. We're going to give it a label of the app is Nginx, and we're going to pull the Nginx 1.8 version of the container, and we're going to say it's available on port 80. So Nginx will serve up a web page, is all it's going to do here. So why don't we go ahead and create this deployment? So to do that, simple command, I'm going to use my kubectl, which is my command line version of Kubernetes control tool. All it does is create the API call to the API server. We're going to say create from a file, and our file is the one we just looked at, kube deploy Nginx YAML. So we do that. It's created the deployment, and we're going to look at that deployment. And you see we have looked for 3 replicas, so that our desired is 3 replicas. Currently it's got all 3 of those up. They're all up to date. If we were doing a rolling update, you could see these change as to the numbers that are up to date, and they're available for the last 10 seconds. We can also actually get the pods themselves and look at those, and here you see the 3 pods that are running. They all contain the deployment identifier, and in the pod name is these last 5 here, giving it a separate name. So what else can we do here? So let's add to it a service. So what I mean by service is a way to reach these pods. So these pods all have their container IP addresses and their pod IP addresses, but they're not necessarily available to everyone. So what we want to do is to create a service. So let's look at a service definition that I have put together. Again, our API version is 1.0. Our kind is service. We're going to call it Nginx service. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a node port on our host here, which is Ubuntu 10. And that port, we're going to say it's container port 80, but we're going to give it a node port of 380 or 30,080 as our port address on our server here to reach that. And what we'll do is we'll load balance amongst the 3 containers available, and we'll tell it that our app is Nginx, right? So we're going to actually go in and create this. So again, we use our kubectl command to create it, and it's been created. We can do we can look at the services. Now there is a Kubernetes service running here already, but we've added an Nginx service as well. And now we can test to make sure that that is available to us by simply going to, let's see, 10.22.204.10 is our server. And yes, I did test this out. So 300, oops. 80, and there's our Nginx server running. We don't really know which of the 3 pods it went to do that because they're load balanced, and Nginx doesn't actually give us which server it's running on. We could probably pull that at some point. So anyway, we know our service is up and running, and now we've exposed it to the outside world on that 380, and that points to port 80. and we have our service running, okay? So let's view some of the information about our Kubernetes cluster here. So the first thing we want to do is to describe our pods. So what this does, and it's just loaded up a bunch of stuff, it's going to do the same thing 3 times. So here was our last thing we looked at. So here's our describe pods. So here's the first pod. It's going to tell us what server it's running on, how long it's been around. It's going to give us our labels here, tell us it's running. It's part of a replica set. This is the pod IP, if we were to look at it using our networking tools. Perhaps later we'll take a look at that. Here's our Docker container image, the version. We pulled it from there. It's exposing port 80, so we're going to point our node port at that we just looked at. And here's some other information about it. And here's its starting information. You'll see the tolerations here are if it's not available for execution for 300 seconds, then we're going to mark it not ready and unreachable, and they'll start a new pod at that point, or a new container at that point. Then you see we do the same thing. The only thing different here is it's running on .12. It's got a slightly different hash function, but it looks exactly the same. And then here's our third pod running there. It's got a slightly different container. It's running on 13 again.